As we celebrate today the feast of Christ the King, I would like to reflect on maybe as a community, what does the end of the liturgical year mean for us? And then, what does Matthew 25 mean for us as the community of St. Agnes and for us as a nation? And then as disciples, how does this gospel call us to individual responsibility for what Jesus asks of us today? We come to an end of the liturgical year with the feast here, and I think we should see endings, or this ending, really as a new beginning. If you've seen on our front lawn, we have our Advent wreath out, ready to turn on for the first Sunday of Advent. And our buildings and ground that did such a beautiful job putting that together, but this ending points us to a new beginning of anticipation and waiting and hope. And how we need that hope. And we've been so patient in the last year. But the patience of Advent invites us into a new beginning. And I know we're preparing as a community for Thanksgiving. And many of our parishioners, sadly, are isolated and in a vulnerable category. And the reality is that it will be hard for many of us to gather with family or the people we're closest with in the next week. There may be emotions, difficult emotions that we're experiencing during this difficult time. There can be loneliness, sadness, fear, anger, separation, the reality of sickness. In a sense, it can be like an exile that leaves us hopeless. Ezekiel knew the hopelessness of the people of God in today's reading. And he offers a word of hope. The prophet speaks of the good shepherd, who for us is Jesus. A shepherd who meets us where we feel lost, that touches our injuries or wounds, that seeks to heal despite the reality, even in his day, in our day, of strong, corrupt leadership that seeks to destroy. We can be confident that the Good Shepherd is on our side, that will guide us, will lead us to new life. And that brings us to Matthew 25, that the Good Shepherd is going to take care of us. But as sheep, disciples of Jesus, this gospel is really about how do we take care of each other as a community. And I want to affirm how we do that in so many, many ways as a community, just to name some. The meals made at our office and taken to the homeless, the Vincent de Paul Society that meets monthly and seeks to help people that are in need, the Kalafafta project that helps young girls get an education and a better future, the COVID Relief Fund that is there for members of our community who are struggling financially during this time. Then there's the Catholic Campaign for Human Development that we tithe this week to help bring about social justice change. And how important it is for those that make phone calls in our community and are reaching out to shut-ins and those that are isolated in the pandemic. This is ways that as a community that we take care of each other, the most vulnerable. But this gospel is not about how individually good or bad we are. There is often a critique of organized religion that it can keep people asleep to the reality and need for the present struggle for peace and justice. I have a friend, Bishop John Stowe of Lexington, Kentucky. He's truly a great bishop. He was appointed by Pope Francis. And he has a great commitment to the poor and vulnerable, especially in Appalachia. But he doesn't see them as just poor. He sees them as his brothers and sisters that have the same needs that he has. And I once complained to him that I felt that Matthew 25 could be interpreted for us and lead us to simply just being do-gooders. If we reach out to the most vulnerable, we'll get to heaven. And if we don't, we'll be punished. And that the problem with this interpretation is we can reward ourselves for helping the poor and not change the structures that make them poor in the first place. Bishop John offered me this insight. He showed me that I was looking at the gospel wrong. It is not individuals that are judged in today's gospel, but the nations. So at the end of the liturgical year, embarking upon Advent, how do we see our nation at the end of this year? It brings us to the endings to say, what demands does it place on us? How will we respond? And to take a tough look at reality. Immigration, children being separated from parents at the border. I was a stranger. People in prison, those that have been executed this year, those that are still on death row. I was in prison. So many every day die of hunger and starvation. In the top 1% of the world, holding most of the resources. I was hungry and thirsty. COVID-19 and a pandemic that has taken unnecessary lives due to the irresponsibility of some of us not wearing masks or failing to work together. I was sick. A polarization that builds walls and stops us from seeing what is best in our brothers and sisters. And we've seen how racism in our country is still a major problem. And our structures and systems have not moved as far as we may have once thought. What you did for the least of my brothers and sisters, you did for me. This feast comes to us, Christ the King. Pius XI called it in 1925. And I can't help at that time to see that it was somewhat viewed in a self-righteous way, that the church was pointing at the secular world and how bad it was. And how different this is than Pope Francis in his latest encyclical Fratelli Tutti that says we have to take a hard look at reality, that we are the world and we are responsible for it. And that we have to name these laments I've named, that Francis names. Because once we lament, then it's possible that we can move to a place of hope for a better future. There are great possibilities of hope. We wait patiently, but the news is that soon there will be a vaccine. That's what we're waiting for. The need to celebrate the courage of those that work in the medical field, but also essential workers in grocery stores and other places. When we get through this, I wonder if we'll have more of an appreciation next Thanksgiving for those that we get together with on a regular basis. And after a challenging, divided election, hopefully we will see more of a need to work together, for politicians to work together, to come up with financial support, to help the unemployed to get back on their feet again, to change the structures of institutions and where racism exists. The point of Matthew 25 is not a story of getting out of this world to heaven or hell. The point of Matthew 25 is, as a nation, we're going to go to heaven or hell together. Or as Catholic social teaching teaches us, we will either rise or fall together. That we're all in this together. And whether we agree with each other or not, we need to support each other, is what Jesus' message is. But how do we respond? This gospel does not allow us to simply hide behind doctrines and ideas, but puts it out to us. It calls us to action, to move beyond our comfort and security, to reach out to the hungry and thirsty, the sick, the imprisoned, the stranger in our midst. That's not just to see them as our brothers and sisters. It makes each of us ask, it makes me ask, where are the margins in our lives that we're called to reach out to? We don't go to these margins to change, because that would be arrogant. We go there to be changed, to make ourselves vulnerable enough to see that the needs of our brothers and sisters are the same needs of the human condition, the same needs that we have. Gospel today, like Francis does so well in his encyclical, doesn't let us make excuses. I am reminded of Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz. And all the tragedy of the Holocaust after that, he wrote a book called Yes to Life in Spite of Everything. And the book reminded me of Matthew 25, because Viktor Frankl was saying that many times we get hung up in the intellectual question of what is the meaning of life. And it's the wrong question. And Frankl says we need a turn, a shift, a Copernican revolution to say to ourselves, what meaning will I bring to life? How will I respond to life? And that even in the midst of suffering and death as believers, we believe that the possibility of new life, and that propels us forward. Today we hear the story of the banquet Jesus invited to in Matthew 25. And it reminds us of this banquet that we're about to celebrate. We're called to bring our community to this table. We're called to bring our country to this table. We're called to bring our individual lives to this table, to feed off of that bread for the journey so that we can follow these marching orders of Matthew 25. But we also bring our joys as we embark upon Thanksgiving, what we're most grateful for. And we also bring our sorrows to recognize the sorrows that we have is the sorrows of the whole human condition. So whether you're here or at home, when we gather around this table, whatever your pain is, if we share it together, it's less. And if we share our joys together, they're greater. That's what we celebrate at this table. It is a true communion. Or as Dorothy Day, who had Catholic worker houses for the underprivileged, once said about the houses that those came, the homeless, that this meal says something to us. It calls us beyond duty. She says, to love is not a duty, but a privilege. And should it not be for all of us? It begs the question, do we want to meet Christ? Do we really believe? We cannot love God unless we love each other. And to love, we must know each other, and we will know him in the breaking of the bread. And we are not alone anymore. Heaven is a banquet, and life is a banquet. Even with a crust where there is companionship. Let's share in that